1.2 dig T 115 horsepower H5 FT/RA2 DDT. In the second generation, the Qashqai became available with a 1.2-liter turbo engine. Until 2016, this engine had an inherent problem with oil consumption, caused by engineers choosing the wrong piston rings for it. Plus, there was another problem that in some operating modes, crankcase gases made their way to the top through the oil scraper and compression rings. The ECU firmware was changed, and if the engine continued to consume liters of oil, then the whole thing was changed. Sometimes dealers only change the piston rings, but this did no good. In general, 2/3 of such engines today practically do not consume oil. You have to add a maximum of 1 liter between changes, i.e. once every 8,000 kilometers. Also, the timing chain of this engine lasts an average of 90,000 kilometers, it begins to rattle, and errors in phase regulation appear. There is no point in postponing the replacement because she jumps easily and naturally. And along with it you have to change the oil pump chain, because it also stretches and rattles no less than the timing chain. The direct injection system is not marked with any particular troubles, although there are cases of gasoline leaking through the fuel injection pump into the engine with an increase in oil in the sump. The fuel pressure sensor may fail, which will affect the dynamics, or the engine will not start at all due to fuel overflow. 2.0 114 horsepower MR20DD. Most of the second generation Qashqais were sold with a 2-liter naturally aspirated gasoline engine. This is a new school engine with an aluminum, non-lined cylinder block, with a timing chain drive, a pair of phase shifters, direct injection and without hydraulic compensators. If you don't skimp on motor oil and use high-quality viscosity up to 5 watts minus 30 or a more liquid 0 watts minus 20, then there will be no problems or oil waste. True, the timing chain will rustle at 150,000 kilometers, and when replacing iridium spark plugs, 224011 Va1C, the new ones must be tightened with a force of 20 Newton meters and no more, otherwise the cylinder head will easily crackle on the over-tightened spark plug socket. The spark plugs should be checked and, if necessary, replaced if there are twitches in the engine operation and, accordingly, misfires. The 2-liter engine runs more than 300,000 kilometers without any problems. Yes, direct fuel injection does not allow you to pour any kind of gasoline into the tank with impunity, but in general there are no big problems with this. By the way, on almost all Qashqais with this engine, the standard ears holding the halves of the air duct are broken off. The first clip is located on the air duct immediately behind the front left headlight, and the second is on top of the air filter box, to the right of the right glass under the hood. These ears are very fragile and burst literally the first time you replace the air filter. Instead, use any suitable things, from plastic ties to metal brackets, AK 2217 1,109,290, for filter boxes. 1.6 DC 130 horsepower R9M. The second generation Qashqai received a new turbo diesel with a displacement of 1.6 liters. This is a French engine developed by Renault. Unlike the 1.5-liter engine from the same company, it has a timing chain drive. True, chain usually lasts about 150,000 kilometers. But its cylinder block is cast iron. We cannot help but note that the cast iron block is rather weak and may crack before 2019. Then either the oil will begin to get into the antifreeze, or it will all flow out. But we can reassure buyers and owners of the Qashqai, there have been no cases of cracks in diesel cylinder blocks on the crossover. Otherwise, the 1.6 DC is a conventional diesel engine in the modern sense. Lasts a long time. All 2-pedal Qashqais are equipped with CVTs. Moreover, all-wheel drive versions of this crossover are all equipped with CVTs, without exception. JF015E, the weakest CVT, designated JF015E, went to the 1.2-liter turbo engine. This continuously variable transmission is complex. It even has a planetary gearbox that actually provides 2 stages of forward motion. Its introduction into the design was necessary to increase the range of gear ratios so that its pushing belt would not work, roughly speaking, along the edges of the cones. In practice, this variator barely survives 100,000 kilometers and is sent for overhaul due to the destruction of the input shaft bearing. Chips from the bearing enter the oil pump control valve, the valve body and its spool valves. In general, if you slightly start this moment, the JF015E variator will literally self-destruct. Even in the housing, where may appear due to play in the input shaft. In general, when buying a car with such a variator, it is worth removing the pan and checking whether chips have collected there. If you manage to send this variator for overhaul at the initial stage of wear of the input shaft bearing, then you can only get away with replacing it and inspecting the oil channels, replacing the oil pump regulator, in the worst case, Replace the variator and wait for the same story. JF017E, with a 2-liter naturally aspirated engine and with a 1.6-liter turbo diesel, different CVTs are used. These are respectively JF016E and its strengthened version JF017E. Unlike the 015TH CVT, these CVTs have no horror stories, and with normal maintenance and smooth pedaling without sudden starts, these CVTs last for more than 300,000 kilometers. It is very important to change the variator fluid in them every 40,000 kilometers, because these variators are extremely sensitive to its purity. The gaps in the valve body spools are minimal, so the waste products of the variator interfere with their mobility. Then the stepless smoothness of operation disappears. To refill all 3 listed CVTs, either the branded NS3 fluid, 999 MP NS300P, at $50 per liter, or its numerous analogs, which are 2 to 4 times cheaper, are used. It's enough to just do a partial replacement, and refilling takes about 4 liters of new CVT fluid. You also need to change the fine filter and its gasket 315263VX0A. The fine filters for the JF015E, 317263JX0A, and JF016E, JF017E, 31726/28/0A variators, although interchangeable, are actually different. During a partial oil change, it is highly recommended to remove the pan and clean it. At the same time, you can see if the magnets have caught any chips. In the pan under the hydraulic unit there are coarse filters. On the Qashqai, depending on the year of manufacture, there are 2 modifications of such a filter, 317281XE0D, 31728/28/0A. They replaced each other in December 2015. These filters originally cost $50. In principle, they can be changed every 2 to 3 oil changes. The pans need to be installed with new gaskets 313973JX0A for JF015E, 313971XF0D for JF016E, JF017E, and the pan bolts need to be tightened in the correct order and to the correct torque. 5.9 Newton meters, not just any way. Some owners change the variator fluid using the replacement method, i.e. with pumping until the drained liquid becomes clearer. It's your choice, but this method uses twice as much CVT fluid. On the 2nd generation Qashqais, a knocking sound often appeared in the steering rack. As often happens, knocking occurs due to wear of the support bushing. In this case, this bushing is on the right. The worn bushing can be pulled out without removing the rack, just with the car raised. You need to turn the steering wheel all the way to the left, remove the right tie rod, remove the broken bushing, and insert the repair one. Repair bushings are produced by some local manufacturers. The internal diameter of this bushing is different for the English and St. Petersburg Qashqai, 20 and 26 millimeters, respectively. The radiator fan, 214814YA0A, of the Qashqai is not very durable. It lasts an average of 100,000 kilometers. Its shaft does not have any bearings and rotates on a bushing. It wears out over time, so the impeller begins to rotate with play, which is accompanied by vibration and beating. A new original radiator costs about $400. Replacements are 2 to 3 times cheaper. There is nothing special to say about the all-wheel drive of the Nissans. The angular gearbox is reliable. There are no bad spots like on the Koreans. The electromagnetic clutch for connecting the rear axle is tenacious. As already noted, all-wheel drive on these cars is combined only with a 2-liter engine and a CVT. There are no options with a manual transmission at all. If you are skidded off-road, then try to go through all dangerous places on foot. The electronics take great care of the variator. Driving tight is literally impossible. Keep an eye on the axle shaft boots, CV joints, they often burst after winters. Front wheel bearings, 402024/0A, are expensive, $250 original. Inseparable from the hubs. And they last about 100,000 kilometers. The cost of substitutes is $100 on average. Nissan's front McPherson strut arms come only assembled, 5450004CL1B, and are sold for $120, which is quite acceptable for the original. However, you can buy both of its silent blocks in the ball joint aftermarket and spend $30-40 on it plus the repressing work. Steering ends, B8644/0A, last for about $70,000 km. Their price is up to $100 for the original and $20-30 for good replacements. The original stabilizer links, 546184CB0A, last the same amount of time, but sell for $30. Original shock absorbers are often given up at 120,000 kilometers. Front 54,302 BM91B, cost up to $170. Rear $56,210 BM92A, up to $85. The rear suspension of most Qashqais is independent. Dependent is found only on front-wheel drive copies of the English assembly. The multi-link, in which there are 4 levers on each wheel, as well as the torsion beam, do not require attention until a mileage of 250,000 kilometers. Original silent blocks are not offered separately for rear suspensions. Original multi-link levers cost from $130 to $300. Silent blocks for them cost from $5 to $20 a piece. There is one note about the Qashqai body: the paint layer is weak. It is easily chipped with stones and rubbed off. But chips don't rust. But there is an exception. The roof panel, traditionally for many brands, is not protected from corrosion in any way except by a layer of paint. Therefore, chipped paint on it easily blooms and slowly swells. As a rule, all this appears on the edge of the roof above the windshield. By the way, pay attention to the condition of the sealant between the body panels. There are such joints in the trunk door opening. Cracks in the sealant indicate that the Qashqai was parked on high curbs or walked on steep off-road terrain. The light from the halogen headlights is frankly weak. And there is no sensor in the washer fluid reservoir, so it can be drained and left without it at the most inopportune moment. By the way, headlight washers only work when the headlights themselves are on, which reduces washer consumption during the day. What can you say about the interior of the second-generation Nissan Qashqai? It looks good, is made inexpensively, and is quite durable. Depending on the climate, a funny situation occurs here. The ceiling upholstery gets wet. Water begins to drip from under the sun visors. The fact is that there is foam rubber behind the upholstery, which can absorb condensed moisture over the winter. It will freeze and accumulate there, and in the spring it will melt and begin to flow. But if the headliner above the trunk gets wet and smells like washer fluid, then the hose to the rear windshield washer has become disconnected under the roof. Door stops last more than 150,000 kilometers if they are not lubricated. You don't want to experience wear and squeaking. Apply lubricant to the limiter rods. There are cases of clouding of plastic in the wells of devices. The heating threads of the front seats often break, which forces them to remove the upholstery from the seat in order to repair the breakage.